What's up, guys? My name is Ru Castro, fashion and beauty photographer out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today, I bring you a quick tutorial on how I like to utilize frequency separation in my fashion photography. Let's jump right into it. So frequency separation is one of these techniques that I have a love-hate relationship with because it's one of those tools that is great when you need to do some quick editing to skin, but it's also one of those techniques that can easily be taken overboard and make an image look super fake at the end. But I'm going to show you normally how I use it. I tend to prefer to do dodging and burning for skin retouching, but I do utilize frequency separation whenever I need to do a quick retouch, maybe whenever I have maybe 15 or 20 minutes to invest into a photo, as opposed to having multiple hours to invest into it. With frequency separation, what I'll be doing is separating the texture and the colors in the skin and working in each of them individually. So I'll get started by running an action that will set up the frequency separation layers. I won't necessarily go in depth into how to set up every single one of these layers. You can go in and find many tutorials on how to do that, but I will include a download to this action in the description below. Now, I do have two versions of the action. One is for 16-bit images and the other is for 8-bit images. If you're not sure what kind of image you're working with, the one thing to look at is if you look at the top title right next to your image here, the number all the way at the end tells you how many bits is in this image. For example, this is 16, so I'm going to go ahead and run the 16-bit action. Perfect. The first thing you're going to get is for the bottom layer focuses on the colors of an image. We need to blur out all of the texture. And we're going to do that through a Gaussian blur. So I'm going to start out and go somewhere where there's a decent amount of texture. And I'm just going to start moving my radius. And here, right around 4 or so, it starts to go away. I'm probably going to take it up just a tiny bit higher. There you go, about 6.2 or so. Be aware this number is going to be different. It's going to vary from image to image, and it all depends on the size of the file itself. So now we have the frequency separation group right here in my layers. I'm going to open that up and you will see that I have 4 main layers. I'm going to go ahead and describe what I do with every single one of these layers and how I utilize them. First, I have the low frequency or colors layers. This layer is where the colors live. And then you have the high frequency or texture layer. So this is where you're going to have all of the texture for the image. But there's 2 additional layers, and this is where I kind of use it a little bit different than some other people. And that is, this correction layer is an empty layer that I utilize to paint color into the image, as opposed to using any form of like Gaussian blur or so on to blur colors together. And because it is in between, so it's kind of like sandwiched between the low and high frequency layer, I can duplicate this layer and make as many as I need. Just in case I ever go overboard, I can just remove one layer or reduce the opacity. And I'll show you how I do that as I go. And then on the high frequency, I don't work on this layer here, but on the high frequency texture copy. This allows me to work on the texture and duplicate this layer as I go. Just in case I ever go overboard, I have the ability of reducing it or removing a layer without losing that base layer of texture. So let's jump right into it. Let's get started. So the first thing I'll do, I'll start working on the high frequency layer, and I'll just get rid of any blemishes or like larger imperfections on the image. And so I'm going to go ahead and start by utilizing the patch tool. And I'll start out with like these little creases right here from makeup and this blemish right here, right underneath the lip. So I'm going to go ahead and select it, move it over. It's a little bit on the larger side. Normally I do a little bit of a smaller selection, but that's okay. I want to make the video too long. The one thing you will notice, even though I removed this large blemish here, the color is still the match. There's a bit of redness there, and we're going to address that once we start working on the low frequency layer. So I'm just going to go ahead and go throughout the image and remove any kind of imperfections on the texture. I may speed up through this process as I know it gets a little boring. I want to have you guys watching here for 2 hours. And I don't tend to go too deep into every tiny imperfections, just the ones that stand out the most. Reason being, we're humans, and humans do have imperfections. And in this instance, this image is not necessarily a beauty image, it's not a super close up. So some of these little bumps may not even be noticeable. Now, the one thing you'll notice is as I am utilizing the patch tool to get rid of some of this texture here, is that I do try to keep my selections as small as possible and move them as close as possible, move the sourcing or the sampling area as close as possible to where the original selection was. Reason being, I want the texture of the skin to still be comparable. And if I were to like select something here and drag it all the way out here, you can see that section does not match. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And once again, you can see a little bit of redness here. Don't worry too much about this. We're only focusing on the texture for now. We will address that with the low frequency when we start working with the colors. Now here we have a decent amount of small wrinkles, and this is happening because the model happened to be raising her eyebrow in this pose. We have two options. I have the ability of going in and removing each of these little wrinkles by hand now using the high texture, but I may leave them there just for now and come back to them after I work on the colors layer just to see how much of them are still very noticeable. And that way we don't have to remove every tiny one. We'll just remove some of the larger ones, as I do want to keep some in the image so that it does look natural. Perfect. So now let's start moving on to the low frequency. And what I'm going to do is go to the corrections layer. I am going to select my brush tool and I'm going to keep my opacity at 100, but I am going to bring my flow to 2%. Perfect. And what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start painting in colors little by little. And something that I'll do is that I'll try to keep my sampling as close as possible to the color I like to match. So for example, here you can see a little bit of darkness right above the cheek that we can probably match a little better. So I'm going to sample right from around here and just start blending it in little by little. And some of this you can address also with dodging and burning a little bit later on. But since we're not going into that, I'm just going to do a little bit of frequency separation here to even out the tones just a bit. And you'll see that I'll play with the size of the brush as I go based on the area that I may be addressing. And for example, right by the lips here, right where we had that little blemish, I'm going to get rid of that redness and you can see that disappear. And we have a little bit of a dark patch of skin, a little bit darker here. So I'm just going to go ahead and start sampling some colors into it. And once again, I am sampling from a very close area just so that the colors are not completely different. Perfect. And I'm just going to turn that on and off to give you an idea of what we've done. So this is what we got so far, and it's made a significant difference just little by little, and without using any form of blur tool. I feel like this gives you a more natural tone, a more natural transitions. And I'm just going to continue to repeat this throughout the entire face. And as I go right now, I already done a little bit of the cheek and right under the lips. I am going to create a new blank layer and then continue to paint and do corrections in between here. Perfect. Let's see what we got so far. This is this other layer here. Perfect. And we're gonna start working on the forehead. I'm just gonna create a third layer. I'm just being cautious as I go. I'll keep creating layers just so that I can be as non-destructive as possible in the process. See how this looks. The forehead is the area that I tend to be very cautious because you can easily make it look super flat and or like smudged. Nah, and we definitely don't want that. Cool. And this is okay for now, as I will normally go ahead and do some dodging and burning afterwards, but for now we'll just keep on playing with the color tones. And naturally there will be a bit of shadows right under the lips that are just casted by the lip itself, so I don't want to make it super bright compared to the chin, or match it too much to the chin, so that it still looks like there was a little bit of shadow there. And I do think this little area here does not look too good. So because I am using multiple layers, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and use my eraser tool. And in this case, I am going to bring my opacity straight up to 100% and get rid of this little bit of area here. Oh, clone 2. I'm trying to get my eraser. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and keep on painting my colors in. Now I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of her back and just make the tones a little more uniform. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and remove some of this redness here. And in this instance, you can see that I do go a little bit more than before with my brush, just because it's a significant difference in color. Now we're going to go back to the nose. And the only reason I jump from like different areas is just I can get bored very, very quickly. So I just keep myself entertained by switching from like back to the face, come back. Since it is doing like the same thing over and over, it can be a bit repetitive. And by the way, you can do this as much or as little as you like. So I don't feel like there's like an exact recipe. You would just know like how much you want to put into it or not want to put into it. As far as time, the more time you put into it, you can potentially end up going overboard. So that's something to keep in mind. You can very easily go beyond what it may be needed. So just be mindful of that. Now I am working a little bit faster than I normally would since I'm rushing it, just because I'm making the video. Don't want to go like super perfect, but normally I would say you can easily invest 20 to 30 minutes per image in utilizing this kind of technique. So it does take some time, so just be mindful of that. So now that we did the colors for the forehead, I did share that we were going to come back to that on the high frequency. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to duplicate my high frequency layer, just so that I have another one to go back to if I ever need to. And in this instance, I am going to go to the patch tool again, and once again try to make my selections as small as possible, just so that they look a bit uniform. And I'm kind of going to go for the larger little creases here. See, and I may keep it going as it is, even though I don't like it the way that it's going. But what I may do is go all the way through all of the wrinkles and then reduce the opacity so that we still get a little bit of a hint of them, just not as prominent. Cool. So starting to look a little blotchy, which I don't really like that look. So what I'm going to do is take this layer that I duplicated, reduce the opacity to bring back a little bit of that texture to about 50% or so they still remain there. And I'm just going to remove some of the larger ones that are still very noticeable here. Perfect. And I am going to go ahead and go back to the low frequency. As you can see, a lot of my work tend to focus more on the color than the texture. I feel like the colors end up having a larger impact on the overall feel of the image, rather than like the blemishes per se. And I'm just going to paint a little bit more to unify these tones. And the only other thing I'm also going to do with the texture, I just noticed a little bit something here, is the fact that this little section here, it goes from like little bumps right to the wrinkles. So what I'm going to do is utilize the clone stamp tool to blend these in a little. So I'm just going to use the clone stamp tool, probably at around 50% opacity, and focus on current layer instead of current and below. And I'm just going to clone a little bit of this texture right into this transition here. I don't know if it's extremely noticeable, but I'll show you the difference. Before and after, it just blends in a little bit better. See if I overdid it. I may have done it. Perfect. So I'll leave that as it is there, and then just come back with the eraser tool around 30% and just remove the edge. So I'm gonna go to the brush and I'm gonna make it bring the hardness all the way down to 0 so that I can fade in the amount of erasure I want to apply to remove some of these colors here. Cool. So by doing it with a 30%, it allows me to blend that in a little. And there we are. And then once again, still a tiny little bit lighter than it should. But if I was to do the dodging and burning, I will even that out utilizing dodging and burn. Let's see what else we got. Cool. For the most part, I think this is a fairly decent photo as far as skin. I will normally go in probably a little bit deeper, a little bit more than it is now, but not too much more. I probably do like another 10 minutes or so in this photo, but I wouldn't do much more because I do want it to look real, and I do want it to still keep some of the texture, some of the imperfections, just getting rid of some of those things that might have been a little bit distracting. Other than that, I'll quickly show you the before and after. There you have it. So there's a quick tutorial on how I like to utilize frequency separation. You have the ability to go a little bit further with this technique if you like, something that matches your style. If you haven't yet, please hit the like button and subscribe below. If you do have any topics that you would like to see or any specific tutorials that you would like me to make, please drop them in the comment below. Thank you. Deuces.